Good. It is right 2 o'clock. Okay. Good. Good. We are now 77 participants, and I would like to open this webinar this afternoon. I welcome everybody to join us to this so-called community of expertise. The purpose of it is to receive information and share information. It's a give and a take. In the first part of the webinar, we will have some information brought to us. And in the second part of the webinar, we will have interaction with the participants. My name is Christian Hay, and I'm going to give you some information about the rules for this afternoon. The first rule is that everybody is on mute. The participants and as well the panelists, everybody is on mute. For the participants, we have a means to communicate. You type your questions in the Q&A facility, and we will see that on our end, and we will handle that in the course of the afternoon. You may write your question and your comments during the presentations. You may receive a written answer through the Q&A, and sometimes you will receive a verbal answer because we think this is of general interest and would be helpful to everybody. It may also happen that your question cannot be answered in a written way immediately or orally. Then we will do our best to answer that afterwards. There is also a way to for you to express your approval to a question. You have a thumb up, which you can click on and that would raise the question higher in the pile of the pending questions. To access all these things, you have a kind of a bar on the bottom of your screen. Usually it is on the bottom, and there you find so-called Q&A. In French, there is another abbreviation for it. Suppose, depending on the settings you have on your computer, it will be in a different language. This meeting is, I would say, highly protected against, unwished participation. In that sense, everything is password protected. When somebody registered, that somebody should have used its personal link to access to the platform. The session is recorded, and it will be made available through the YouTube channel of UNICOM. But since we have a little bit more than 100 participants registered, now we are 93 on the call, those who will be in excess of 100 will or should be redirected directly on the YouTube channel. This webinar is published directly on the YouTube channel now. At the very end of the webinar, the Committee of Expertise, you will see a questionnaire, a very simple questionnaire asking you 3 questions so that we can understand your appreciation of the webinar. Today, we have 2 speakers and 3 panelists. So Veronica, I have to look at my other computer because I forgot already her title. She is a PMS business lead at Regulatory Data Management Service, European Medicine Agency. Veronica is the person who is leading also the SPOR meetings and many of the PMS meetings in several circumstances, and she is our main counterpart when we have questions regarding PMS. The second speaker is Marcos Fernandez Gomez. He is PMS co-business lead, and so they team together to in their daily business and to also address ourselves today. We have a panel of 3 persons. Isabel Chicharo, she is head of regulatory data management at European Medicine Agency. So personally, I know Isabel for a while. She is the skilled lead of that work effort for already a number of years. And I hope the job will be done before our respective retirement, because we would all like to see IDMP, respectively SPOR, implemented. That will be mostly for her, more than for me, before my retirement. The second speaker, or pardon, panelist, is Malin Fladvad. Malin is working at the WHO Competence Center in Uppsala. That competence center is addressing the drug monitoring center. Maybe some of you are not aware of that, but the adverse events reporting and analysis and the alerts are worldwide driven by this structure in Uppsala in Sweden, and Malin is one of the person leading that work effort. Our third panelist is Patrick Middag. Patrick is one of the industry co-chair for the work effort of the European Medicine Agency to implement IDMP. Patrick works for BMS and is responsible for regulatory affairs in this region and more. So we have here a set of people to bring the information to us and to comment the information, respond to your question this afternoon. And I think this is a very selected well-selected team to inform us about this European implementation guide version 2. Again, when you have questions, you will please use the Q&A facility. You will have seen that there is a possibility also to chat with the speaker. We prefer that you use the Q&A facility. It's more transparent for everybody, and it facilitates also the moderation of the meeting. Well, here we have the first slides to transition from my introduction work, but let me already thank the speaker and the panelists for their engagements to share with us at UNICOM their information, the way they are progressing in this important task for implementation. With that, I give the floor to Veronica, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me correctly. If not, just please type in the chat. So first of all, I would like to thank very much UNICOM, and in particular, Christian Hay, for giving us the opportunity to be here today to bring awareness of the work that we have been done until today in relation to PMS, but more in particular, the main updates of the EU implementation guidance. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sure my colleagues share the same feeling. So as anticipated, my name is Veronica Lipucci di Paola. I am the current product management service business lead at IDMP, supported with my colleague Marcos Fernandez Gomez, who will also present today to share a few updates which are purely related to the processes of the electronic submission of the data. We both report to our head of regulatory data management service, our head Isabel Chicharo. So our role here is to develop the EU IDMP implementation guide with the cooperation of our internal colleagues, but also not only from our division, but also from other divisions of the EMA. However, it's part of our daily job to cooperate, I can say quite intensively, with the relevant national competent authorities and the industry stakeholders group. And this is done in order to make sure that we can deliver a functional new service database that can meet everyone's needs, requirements, and that this can be also ISO compliant. So this database, as you know, its name is PMS, and it will be the successor of the so-called XCVMPD or Article 57 database in the long future. So in the next slide, I will provide you an overview of the content of the EU IDMP implementation guide, precisely version 2.0. An high level of the details of what can be expected also in the next releases of the UIG, but also some key messages to take away regarding the UIG implementation plan, but also UIG in publication and the PMS implementation plans. So very briefly, in the next slide, you will find that there is a list of topics which we'll cover, of course, in order of presentations. If I can have the next slides, please. I will, first of all, I think that's the first question that may come up to your mind, or at least some of you, can be why the EMA is here today. So the answer is that we are here because on the 22nd of February, the EMA, in strict cooperation with the EU network, NCAs and industry, has worked very hard and intensively to develop and publish the second version of the UAG, so the version 2.0. The fact is that this release marks the beginning of the PMS preparatory phase. This means that in future, the future users of PMS will need to start looking really at the content of the UAG, as these are not expected to change substantially with the next release, even though we feel that we still need to enhance the quality of this documentation, but also to look at the PMS data model in order to prepare themselves and their database for the go-live of PMS. Anyway, further information are also available on the EMA website to clarify these aspects. In the next slides, I will show you where this is coming from. So, well, the EMA and the EU network has and is intensively working to develop a system to be ISO IDMP compatible and which can allow the exchange of harmonized data across the EU. As you very well know, the identification of medicinal products, the IDMP, is a set of 5 ISO standards which have been developed to identify and describe the medicinal products in a more structured but also harmonized way across the globe. The scope of IDMP is indeed to facilitate the reliable exchange of the medicinal products information in a more robust but also consistent manner in comparison to what we have available today. It is important also to highlight that the use of these standards is a regulatory requirement, as these are mandated by the EU legislation, and you can find it very clearly stated in Article 25 and 26 of the Commission Implementing Regulation. Hence, this is the reason why PMS is being discussed and is under development, and in a broader way, that's the reason why SPOR exists. So, moreover, it is also well known that the ISO IDMP standards have been developed to apply globally. We know that, and it applies for medicines for human use. However, because of the global applicability principle and because the pharmaceutical legislative framework may differ across the world and the continents, from a European point of view, most of our job really consists in to understand how to better fit the ISO IDMP requirements into our European legislation framework. Hence, to see them appropriately reflected into our European databases. So for this reason, you will notice that we have also introduced in the PMS data model some extensions which are not available in ISO, but this doesn't, I mean, we hope that it might be also considered maybe if deemed applicable at global level, maybe in future on the next release of ISO. Last but not least, the PMS message is based on HL7, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Standards. And as we have reported in version 2.0 of the UAG, this is based on the FAR specification version 4.2.0. However, just please bear in mind that we may update it in due course in order to reflect the latest updates. In the next slide, I would like to recap a little bit the path and the work that until now this has been done in this regard. And you will certainly recall that with the go-live of XVMPD database in 2012, the industry started to be legally required to submit the product information for medicines which are authorized for human use. A few years later, a significant piece of work, the famous ISO IDMP standards, that you can see in this nice cake picture in the slides, was made available by ISO. This led to the need for the agency and at the European level, the NCAs and industry, to align their databases and to apply the developed ISO IDMP formats and standards. So this was the time when the program called SPOR was established at the agency with the scope to enhance the quality of the database, but in a more standardized and harmonized way. SPOR started to go live in a phased approach. As you may remember, with 4 services, aim to create and maintain standardized master data precisely on substance, products, organization, and referentials, where R, S, and O were developed first in order to be able to support PMS. In summary, RMS and OMS, as you can see from these slides, were launched in July 2017, while SMS was launched in July 2019. However, PMS is still not available, but is planned to come in the near future, and as soon as we complete the next releases of the UAG, in particular the version 2. So this can support the first step of the implementation plan, which we will describe later on. And however, as I said, the publication of the UAG version 2 has basically launched the start of the preparatory phase for the industry and NCAs. In the next slide, I will provide you an high level of the details of the plan timelines and the rationale behind each version, and that has to be released and that will be released also. EMA, so in cooperation again with the EU network, delivered in January last year a version number 1 of the UAG. As you may recall, this provided a very initial high level of information related to the process and data elements available in PMS. However, given the level of complexity and also to define and agree the target operating model of PMS, and the need to further clarify and define the PMS structure, further versions were planned to be released, which contain deep details on those which are the driving mechanisms of PMS. It brings more information on how the user should be registered and how the data entry of the medicinal product information should be performed in PMS. So for these reasons, on February this year, the UAG version 2.0 was published, addressing many critical aspects of the PMS mechanism in order to allow the stakeholders to start the preparatory phase of the PMS implementation plan. However, as announced on the EMA website also, 2 additional subversions, version 2.1 and 2.2, are planned to be released, and this is done in order to enhance the quality of the information that we have previously provided in version 2.0, but also to clarify further and deeper some aspects related to the electronic submission processes, which you may find already anticipated in chapter 3. So it is important to remind that the complete release of the version 2 is developed to support step 1 of the PMS implementation plan, while the version 3 of the UAG will support the step 2. Of course, we will share further information regarding the implementation plan. In the next slides, you can easily see how many chapters the UAG is actually composed of. While I will provide you later on some additional details, on the different releases planned and the contents, I would like also to bring your attention to the importance of the release version 2.0. It is in this publication, the team has very intensively worked out many issues that deserve to be adequately clarified, which are, as I said, related to each of these chapters that you may find in this blue box. So for which the content of each documentation have been significantly updated, as I said. But if we go to the next slide, you can also have a better view of the overall status of each of the chapters. So in the blue box, you can see the ones which are now available on the EMA website. So those are the ones that you can see in blue, while the black ones are the ones that are still to be created, of which the release is planned for version 3. So these are certainly the chapter 4, chapter 5, and the newly added Chapter 9. However, please bear in mind that we do not exclude that also Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 may be updated to indeed support the implementation of Step 2. Among the blue ones, the introduction and the chapter named Introduction and the Chapter 1, in addition also to the SPOR onboarding of user role documentation, and Chapter 2 have been also very significantly updated, while, as you know, Chapter 3 and Chapter 8 and its annex to Chapter 8 are instead new chapters. So you can see that we still have some chapters released in version 1. These are the Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 relate on the data migration and API. These are still available on the EMA website because these were published as part of version 1. Nevertheless, we have identified that the Chapter 7, referring to the data migration, will certainly require some updates in due course to fully support the Step 1 implementation. I will not spend much time on the next slide, so we can focus also more on the details of the updates of what is important to know. But just for you to bear in mind, the introduction chapters is really a general chapter. It provides you just a high level of information on what's the content of the EU IDMP, IG. Chapter 1 is the registration requirement, containing additional information on how users should be registered and which kind of role should be selected. Chapter 2 has been slightly, the scope has been slightly updated in the sense that previously, if you may recall, this was a chapter for the initial submission. Now this has been changed to the data element chapter. So it describes you really the list of elements that you can find, how to populate, which are the business rules to follow. Chapter 3, as I said, is the basis for submitting electronic, for submitting medicinal product information. And Chapter 8, it's a document that should be really read in conjunction with Chapter 2 because it brings much more clarity on how to interpret and populate certain fields of PMS which are described in Chapter 2. So it's the chapter of the clarification, basically. We have included many examples there, and we thought it was important. In the next slide, I'll start instead chapter by chapter to explain what we have introduced, what has changed. So this is, as I said, it's a simple chapter. It's just provide you an overview of what's the structure and the scope of the UAG. It reflects the latest updates of the UAG version 2.0 agreements, but also it's a kind of it's a document that is very much aligned with the contents of the EMA webpage. It gives much more information about the scope of both versions to be released, the complete version and version 2, but also the sub-versions foreseen, and the version 3 to support Step 2. And of course, some minor updates, which we thought it wouldn't harm to adjust. In the next slide, I will start instead of describing you the registration requirement and the content really of this chapter are basically related to how the user should be registered in PMS in particular. There is a clear link with our EMA account management, and we have clarified hence the registration requirements, the level of accessibility, whether you are a user, a guest user, or a qualified user, the level of public and restricted information that you may find are completely different. But also, most importantly, is the introduction of the training requirements. So we have defined at the very high level, I mean, at least we have the basis, but we have still to work on this side, that we need to allow you to have training course. We will put in place an knowledge evaluation and training confirmation, similarly to what you can still see in IDMP. but of course adapted to the PMS needs. In the next slide, I will just explain you that, as I said, the chapter 1 is the chapter that has to be read in conjunction with onboarding of user or sport data services. This last document has been consistently updated to reflect the PMS business user roles and the permission metrics. So you will notice, if you had the chance to see, that a qualified user may have a different permission compared to the super user. And that's the reason why we have clarified the scope of the qualified user in this chapter. The qualified user, just to bring you a little bit of update, is that user specifically foreseen for PMS to submit and manage product data into PMS. So we clarified this aspect, but also the mechanism and the functionality. We also clarified that the EMA strongly recommends to have at least 2 super user, whether these are from industry or NCAs, but at least this is done for a feedback perspective, for a backup perspective. So in that case, you still have another person who can grant the access to another user from the industry. In the next slide, again, as part of chapter 1, we have also introduced the process which wasn't described about the disabling user access in case of inactivities in a long term. So we have clarified this aspect. We have also extended the notification period, because the EMA automatically sends notification emails to the user who is inactive. And this is now 3 weeks in advance, then 1 week, and then 1 day. And if the user doesn't log in, it will be disabled. However, we also have specified that there is a reactivation mechanism behind, so you can be up to date also in this sense. Next slide, please. I think is on chapter 2. Yeah. So, well, chapter 2, it's a massive chapter. We will need an entire webinar to explain the contents, but I'm trying to keep it at high level. So we have significantly updated. There has been a lot of work done by the members from industry and NCAs in understanding which are the data elements that should be added and made available from a user perspective, but also to facilitate the exchange of information. We have clarified very much in details, but we think that it still needs to be for some clarity in the next versions, the concept of the identifiers. You will see that we have introduced at the level of the medicinal product definition 2 identifiers. One is the PMS ID and the other one is the MP ID. So while the MP ID is part of the ISO IDMP standards, the group thought that there was a need to have another stable identifier, and this is so the PMS ID. So I would invite you all to read the cardinalities and the relationship between these because they are quite important. At the level of the packaged medicinal product definition, we have also included the PCID. This is still part of the ISO IDMP standard. Again, a lot of discussion have occurred between the members and trying to fit properly into our European legislation framework, because we need to take into consideration the legislations. And you will see instead that regarding the additional identifiers, which is the pharmaceutical product ID at the level indeed of the definition of the pharmaceutical products, this is still not available because the system is simply not ready yet, and we still have some dependencies to work out prior to implement this ID. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a very consolidated summary of what is being updated in chapter 2. I anticipated that we have updated the scope of this guidance. We looked very much in deep into the technical informations which needs to be made available for vendors, but also developers to be able to develop and adjust the systems to PMS. We have included also complementary fire information because we thought they were deemed necessary to be provided to the users. We also added one more resource from fire and additional data elements. The reason why is because we thought they were crucial for the implementation of step 1 and the next step. So I'll come to that point later on. In general, we have completely reviewed and corrected the identifiers. There were some problems in some typo in the concept behind the identifiers and the format. But also very important, we have been clarified one of the key concepts, which is really if you have to populate PMS with the product information, is absolutely critical that the content of the EAF, the SMPC, and the relevant sections of the module 3 of the dossier are aligned. And the reason behind it is also explained in the guidance is because you will be in a position where you need to enter information which, if are not aligned, and this is also explained in chapter 8, you may need to take a decision based on the rules that we have defined. We have also clarified, connected to this point, an important aspect which is mentioned in 5.3, which is the ingredient section of chapter 2, but also in conjunction with chapter 8. It basically brings more clarity on how the product composition should be really structured, and this is specifically done in cases also of vaccines where the SMPC information is not aligned with the content of the module 3. But again, we think that we still need to clarify some aspects, in particular the identifiers on the quality and the electronic submission, and also some RMS terminologies and lists which are missing to be created. So that's the goal for the next release. Next section, please. Thank you. I'll go very quickly because I think we don't have much time. But anyway, the mandatory, this is one of the additional resource that we have introduced. This is the provenance, and this is the area where you're required to explain why you're submitting this information, whether this is a nullification, is a notification, or is it just a correction, or is a submission as part of a regulatory submission. So this is the area, it's mandatory, it's a purely metadata, but we thought it would have solved an important problem. In the next slide, instead, I will show you very quickly what we have created. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the PMS ID location. Allow me to use the term location. This is nothing has to do with the OMS service. This is really the place in the medicinal product definition where you can find and you will access the PMS ID, which is again a stable ID, and is composed only by digits, and it has a clear relationship between the MPID and the PCID. In the next slides, instead, I will just show you that we have introduced, this is in line with the XMPD data element, is a quantity operator which allows the user to express more precisely the composition of the medicinal products. The values used are basically based on an RMS list, which is already available. The quantity operator, the conformance is conditional because it depends, of course, as I said, where you will need to populate the information, but it's solving another issue that we identified. And in the next slides, you can also go quickly because, I mean, this is just an overview of the additional data elements that we have introduced. Again, these are not part of ISO, but we thought they were needed because of our European legislation. So they all have a conditional conformance except for the pack size, the authorized dose form, and in the next slides you will see an example of the ATC code. This is a flag which sort the issue when you don't have yet an ATC code or you haven't requested or it doesn't simply apply. In the next, you will see an example of the pack size. In the next, again, you will see the example of the device type of combination and quantity. Again, few updates are expected in this sense because we feel that we still need to look at it. But these are the new data elements. And while the next two slides, you will see the manufactured item description, and the next more the pharmaceutical product description, which is basically allows the user, whenever you have more than one manufactured item or more than one pharmaceutical product, to really include information and describe the differences between the two, one or more pharmaceutical products or manufactured item. So in the next slide, I'll go quickly regarding the chapter 8. I said already that this chapter is massively, there has been a lot of work, but however will be updated again because we have again more examples to include to bring even more clarity. So just please expect additional updates on the content of this chapter, which are purely linked to the information in chapter 2 and chapter 3. In the next slide, instead, I'll show you one of the key, along with the chapter 2 document piece of work, which is chapter 3. This is a complete new chapter. It describes clearly the target operating model, but it's also focused more in details on the step 1 of the PMS implementation. You will also find some details on step 2. It gives you an understanding of the kind of submission paths which may depend on ECD submission. However, we still need to clarify many aspects, specifically in relation to the data migration, which may lead to a data correction and enrichment, and additional aspects such as the identifiers. In the next one, instead, yes, so this is a kind of crucial. I'll leave to my colleague Marcos in the next presentation to go in deeper detail, but basically it explains you the base, whether you have a product authorized for human use under centralized procedure or non-centralized procedure. During step 1, you may have to follow different paths, and based on the type of ECD compilation, whether this applies or not, you may have to follow different paths. I don't go in these details because this is part of Marco's presentation, so I think we can skip it and you have more time to understand it. Quick information about the governance, how the UIG has been developed. So at the bottom neck, we have the Sport Task Force. The Sport Task Force is composed of more than 50 members across the industry, NCAs and EMA. And these are led by our sport co-chairs. And we have Isabel, my boss, she's one of our sport co-chairs, and Patrick is the backup actually. So at the level of PMS, we have a subgroup which is composed by 20 plus members, and during version 2.0 we have created 2 focus groups purely dedicated on the type of chapter, because we had to clarify many aspects on this documentation. So you can see the chapter 8 separately being managed with the focus group on chapter 2 and 3. However, because of the new versions and the fact that we have delivered these chapters, we are now combining the aspects together. So the focus groups now are the focus group on data and the focus group on processes, which has been just, the kickoff meeting has started this week. So we are already on it for the next versions. In the next slide, you can also see how the consultation and the preparation of the guidance has been created. So at the level of the telematics governance, we have been consulting the team for any approval of the processes and to make sure that the due diligence and representation is taken into consideration. They do not need to be consulted for the contents of the UAG, and this is done because we have launched a public consultation to ensure that we can receive the adequate feedback that we need to improve the quality. The sport co-chairs also have working quite hard to ensure that we have been covering any aspects and to prioritize everything, and that's the reason why we have been publishing in February. However, just please bear in mind that for version 2.1 and 2.2, there will be no consultation because the consultation has occurred in July for the whole version 2. So we will just publish upon the agreement with the groups. In the next slide, and I'm almost there, but I think this is the key message to take home. The go live process. So you can see this is part of chapter 3 is described. There would be a minimum 12 months from the publication of the UAG version 2 prior the PMS go live. And this is because it was communicated to be the minimum time for the industry to get ready and prepared for the go live. However, there will be, of course, an implementation plan shared at some point and a separate communication to announce the go live. However, we will not provide this update 12 months in advance. This is an important message because with the publication of version 2.0, we already started the preparatory phases. You can see, and this is important, from the PMS go live, the importance will be that this cap will be, the entire portfolio cap will optionally be allowed to submit the product information via PMS, while for non-cap products, this is still optional until the enforcement of step 2. And once the PMS will be enforced for for cap, which will happen minimum 12 months. Then the product authorized on the cap will be subject to mandatory submission. And this is the key message. If you tick on the next slide, yeah, this is very quick. When do we expect to publish the version 2.1 and 2.2? To give you an understanding, we are planning to release the version 2.1 in June, end of June, ideally same day, same 22nd possibly, June, and then the version 2.2 on 22nd of September. So again, these are the priorities for us, and the reason why is that we need to make sure that the vendors, the industry, and the developers can be ready to start the step 1. And this is the key message. In the next slide, you will see a summary, but I'll stop here to allow, if there is any question, or to allow my colleagues to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronica. Excellent. I encourage you to use the Q&A facilities so that you can ask your questions. We have already a few. I noticed that one of these has been answered directly by written. So I hope this is supporting the need also. So without waiting more, I suggest we continue with Marcos. And after Marcos, we have this open dialogue possible. Marcos, the floor is yours. And thank you, Veronica. I forget to say, oh my God.
Okay.
Thank you, Veronica. So I will try to go a little bit fast because I think some of the questions we have are quite interesting. So I think it's important that we can have some time for the discussion. So if you can go please to the next slide, here we have the topics that we will cover. So we will cover which is the actual process, so the XMPD submissions, and we will go to the new process, so PMS as a new database in the FHIR format, which are the preconditions that we have established for PMS step 1, and also which are the procedures depending on the type of submission. And finally, at the end, I will go quickly with this because you also have this information in the EUIG, but I wanted to give more clarity on these steps is the fire provenance and the different type of submissions. So if you go to the next slide, here we can see which is the actual process we have right now in industry, with the industry, the applications, and also the review of the data. So as you can see here, when industry has to provide an application, so imagine a new application, an initial application or variation or whatever, they have to provide all the information in a dossier. They provide this dossier to the different NCAs or EMA, depending on the type of procedure. And sometimes this dossier is not approved at the beginning. So with those questions raised by NCAs and EMA, it comes back to the industry where they have to provide a new submission. There's a point where this dossier is approved and the information is stored in the EMA or NCA's databases. Industry has done the same with their documents in their own databases. When this application is approved, industry is obliged to prepare an XCV PRN message with the information and to submit this message to the Article 57 database. This information is received by EMA. There are EMA review this information and they make some changes and correction if needed. And there is a quality check process with a third acknowledgement, etc. So at the end, what do we have? We have 3 different databases. So we have the industry, the NCAs, and Article 57 databases, which is where the information might not be really aligned or standardized. So with PMS, and not only with PMS, but with all the different services in the sport project, we are trying to create and to align, standardize, and harmonize all these different databases through the approval process and the regulatory process of the different regulatory activities. So the new process that we have is explained basically in the EUIG version 2.0. In this guidance, as you can see in the EMA webpage, but also in chapter 3, it says that it's mostly focused on PMS step 1. So step 1 means that the centrally authorized medicinal products, the submission of the data is mandatory after a transition period. As Veronica explained, there is a transition period from the go live until CAPS is enforced. And for non-CAPS, the PMS submission is optional, so ME holders and applicants can still submit the information to XCVMPD. EUIG version 2.0 and mostly chapter 2 describes each data element that needs to be present in the new format. The new format, as Veronica also explained, is FHIR, so I'm not going to explain anything more here. And also in the EUIG, we can see and we can find the information regarding the PMS API and how to provide information to PMS in this in chapter 6, where we have the API specifications. There are still ongoing discussions with different topics. So for example, if we have to provide deltas or full data sets, depending on the step of the submission where we are. So it's not the same an initial submission that we do as part of an assessment. So we are still discussions, and chapter 3, for example, will be updated with this information when we have get an agreement. So in next slide, what we have is the preconditions that we have defined in order to applicants and MA holders to be ready to submit the messages to PMS. So first of all, the MA holder or the applicant must be able to generate the FHIR messages. So at the beginning, as the user interface won't be available, only MA holders or applicant with systems able to generate the FHIR message will be able to use this format. Once the user interface is available, then every MA holder and applicant will be able to generate the FHIR message, and therefore CAPS in this case will be mandatory to be provided to PMS. Also, the access to PMS has to be granted and tested for each MA holder and applicant. We are still discussing how this is going to be done. So trainings, how the access is going to be requested, how the access is going to be granted, everything is under discussion, and we will provide you more information once we have agreed something. And the last one is that the XCV PRM is going to be decommissioned for the entire CAP for portfolio of the MA holder or the applicant once PMS is mandatory for those procedures. If the MA holder or the applicant wants to change also or to submit the non-CAPS products to PMS, then the exhibit PRM will be decommissioned for the entire non-cap and cap portfolio of each of the MA holder and applicants, as we have in the explaining chapter 3. In the next slide, what we have is a general overview of the process for the submission in step 1. So depending on the type of procedure, it depends if we have a cap or a non-cap, the path we have to choose in order to submit the data to PMS is different. If we are talking about a cap procedure, so a centrally authorized procedure, then the FHIR is the format to be used. And it depends if the regulatory activity will be closed with an ECTD closing sequence, or if the closing sequence is not present at the end of the procedure. If we have an ECTD closing sequence, then the FHIR message will have to be included in the ECTD. If there is no closing sequence at the end of the procedure, then we will have to provide the information in FHIR format, but directly through the API. For non-caps, as we said, the use of FHIR is still optional. And if FHIR is used, then we have to provide the information directly through the API. But in the next slide, we have more details. So if we focus on caps and where ECTD is used to provide the submission, we have here that the ECTD will have to be included in the working documents folder of the ECTD. So for the moment, this is what we have decided. The FHIR message it's provided in the working documents folder. Then the applicant will have to provide the submissions to the NCA or EMA in this case, because we are talking about a centrally authorized product. EMA will receive the dossier. There will be a validation and assessment. The sequences that we have to provide as part of the assessment, so the day 120, day 180, etc. We have to provide also the FHIR message. In this case, the full data set has to be provided in those sequences. And then once the procedure is approved, we will have to provide the closing sequence with the FHIR message and the information, the data that has been approved in this FHIR message, and this will be pushed to PMS, where the data will be captured. As we have said, there is a transition period for the go live of PMS until PMS is enforced for caps. So if you are not able to generate the FHIR message with your own systems, then you have to wait until the user interface is available. In the case of caps, as we are providing the ECTD, and in the ECTD we have the documents, there won't be the need to attach the documents to the FHIR message. Instead, we will be able to create a link from the ECTD to the FHIR. We are still discussing the technical components of these links. So once we have more information, chapter 3 will be updated as well. It's important to understand that only data that is impacted by the procedure should be updated. So imagine that I'm submitting a variation type 2 because I want to make a change in an indication. I can only update information in the resource of the indications. I cannot make a change in the storage conditions, for example. Okay. The data in this case is validated during the procedure. So the FHIR message is going to be validated during the procedure. But once the information is in PMS, this will be fed back to Article 57, and a standardization will be done also in Article 57. If you go to the next slide, in this case, we have the CAPS procedures, but where no ECTD is provided with this submission. So we have two types here. So regulatory activities not subject to ECTD submissions, or regulatory activities without a closing sequence. In this case, the FHIR message will have to be provided through the API to PMS. In these cases, we will have to attach the documents to the FHIR message because there is no link possible to the document to the ECTD because there's no ECTD sequence. And also the data will be validated after the procedure and standardized in Article 57. If you go to the next slide, here we have two examples. So imagine that we have an initial email. In this case, the initial submission, we have to provide the FHIR message in the working documents folder of the ECTD. During the assessment, we have to provide different sequences as well. So the FHIR message and the full FHIR dataset will have to be included in those sequences. And once the initial MA has been approved with the closing sequence, we have to provide the FHIR message with the approved data, and this data will be pushed to PMS. Instead, if we have, for example, a type 1B variation, the initial submission can be provided or has to be provided with, within the ECTD. Once the variation is approved, we can have two cases. If there is no closing sequence, because sometimes when we provide a variation type 1b and it's approved, we don't have to provide a closing sequence. So if there is no closing sequence in ECTD, then we have to create the fire message and submit it to PMS through the API, so we can have the information in PMS. If we create a closing sequence and we submit the closing sequence, then the fire message can be included in the ECTD, and this fire message will be pushed also to PMS. In the next slide, we change from caps to non-caps. As we have said before, it is not mandatory to make the submissions for non-caps to PMS. We can still use the XCV-PRN message to provide information to Article 57 or XCV-MPD. But if the MA holder or the applicant wants, you can choose to change to fire. In this case, we will have to provide the fire message through the API to PMS. It has been agreed also with NCAs that if you want to provide the fire message together with the ECTD, you can do it, but this fire message won't be nor evaluated, not considered. So you can provide it if you want as a best practice, so you do also the caps and non-caps, you do it the same way. But for non-caps, this fire message in the ECTD won't be considered. In this case, as well as the caps without an ECTD closing sequence, as we are providing the fire message through the API, the documents shall be attached to the fire message. This data is not going to be validated during the procedure by NCAs, so the data is subject to the Article 57 quality control processes. So we will have this, the third acknowledgement, etc. If we go to the next slide, here I have the different, as Veronica was explaining, we have included a new element in chapter 2, is the fire provenance. So here we have to, it's an element to identify and define why are we submitting this fire message. So there are 6 different submission types, as we can see here, but if we go to the next slide, we will go one by one. So for example, if we go please to the next slide, we have the regulatory submission initial. In this case, we need to provide an initial fire message when we need the business IDs to be generated once the data is included in PMS. The fire message is included in the working documents folder for caps and through the API for non-caps or caps where there is no ECTD submission. It's important to understand that in those cases, for example, for non-caps, but also for caps, we are submitting the e-application form in the ECTD, and we are also providing the fire message. In this case, EAEF data will prevail over fire data for the moment. Okay, so the EAEF data is the one that is going to prevail. We also have another type of regulatory submission is maintenance. In this case, is any type of submission for maintenance. For example, renewals or transfer are considered maintenance activities, but also variations, etc. After the approval of this maintenance activity, we need to provide an ECTD closing sequence with the fire message, or we have to provide directly through the API. If no PMS data is updated as part of the maintenance activity, then no submission is needed. We don't have to provide any fire message. And as we said before, it's important to understand that only the data impacted by this procedure should be updated. Okay? We cannot make changes to other data which is not impacted by this specific procedure. If we go to the next slide, we have another type of provenance. So we have, for example, the notifications. We have to provide notifications when we are going to make a change to the QPPV, PSMF, or pharmacovigilance entry information, because those updates are not evaluated by NCAs. If we have to make a change or an update on the marketing status, we have to do it also as part of a notification, or updates on authorization status triggered by NCAs. For example, if we have a rejection, a suspension, etc., we have to update the fire or the PMS data with a notification. Also, the fire must be submitted through the API. So this is not part of the ECTD compilation, so the fire message has to be provided through the API. In the case of amendments, an amendment is provided to make correction to, and that's important, isolated fire resources. Why do I need to provide or to submit corrections to the fire resources? Maybe because as part of the go live, EMA is going to migrate the data from XCVMPD and other sources to PMS. So if as part of this migration there is data to be corrected, if we do it for isolated fire resources, then we have to provide an amendment, or also corrections that are not linked to regulatory assessment. If we go to the next slide, there we have the enrichment. An enrichment is also used to correct erroneous migrated data, but in this case, we have to provide the full data set. We use the enrichment activity to complete the full PMS record as part of IDMP and the EU IG rules. And it's important, and you have this explained in chapter 3, there will have to be one enrichment submission for each medicinal product at certain point. So we will define a date or a deadline by when each already approved medicinal product have to be enriched in the PMS database. For the nullifications are used to nullify entities that has been created by mistake. The process is still under discussion, but the rules will be in principle similar to the rules we have now for Article 57. But the important thing is that with the TOM, nullifications will be reduced, but because as we are going to provide the data set, the fire message together with the procedure, then we won't have duplicates of records. It will happen for non-caps, or it can happen for non-caps or other type of submissions where the information is provided directly through the API. So in these cases, we will be able to make nullifications. So that's my presentation, a little bit fast, but I think it's important that we can provide, if you have questions, so the panelists can also have some discussion on the topics that we have presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Thank you again to Veronica for her very extensive introduction to this topic. Marcos, to have been really straight to the point regarding your aspects. It's time now for questions and answer. The idea is that you ask your questions, as I said in the introduction, through the Q&A box. I noticed that a number of questions have been already answered, but nevertheless, if there are more questions, that is exactly what we expect us to discuss. So the panelists can put their camera on and they will enter in the discussion. On my screen, I see a question asking, is the PMS database intended to be readable by a stakeholder involved in the clinical use of restricted drug reference description, for instance, electronic patient record editor for prescription function? And if so, by when? Who wants to answer that? So it's about the intention.
I suppose I can take that one. So once we have the data and we are happy with the quality of the data and we have a process that ensures that it's good quality and trusted data, the vision is still to make use of it for e-prescription, for cross-border prescription, for supporting supply chain issues, and as many use cases as we can. But we still have to cross a few bridges, if you may, in terms of ensuring that we can reach that reliable process that guarantees that the data is indeed trusted for those specific use cases.
Thank you, Isabel. Any addition from our panelists? Doesn't look like. Good. Another question which comes from the US. Is there a prescribed section of the ECTD in which to submit the fire message?
So maybe I can take also this one. So as I said before, maybe too quickly. So at the moment, the fire message has to be provided in the ECTD working documents folder. So there were several discussions. We have to include it together with the e-application form in section 1.2 of the ECTD. For the moment, we have decided that the fire message has to be included in the ECTD working documents folder.
Thank you. Any other comments? Doesn't look like. I see another question which got an answer and a couple of comments already, but I've been advised that it is a general interest question. Fire message or fire documents? Is the submission based on the fire messaging's paradigm?
So maybe I can take the question. So basically, so it's not very clear maybe from the guidance whether it is a message or a document, but what we expect is a generic message that is part of the ECTD, which will be in the fire format. And this same message is expected to be a payload that can be submitted to the PMS API via a direct integration as well. So maybe I'm not sure what kind of, it is the terminology that is not clear. Maybe we should improve in this area, we can do it. But the message that we will use is envisioned to be a fire bundle of a fire resource, which is relevant to indeed define a medicinal products. I hope this reply to the question.
Okay, maybe Jose, who asked this question, may a little bit explain what he meant with that. I'm searching Jose on my lists. If you don't mind, I will give you the microphone to explain a little bit better what he was thinking. You are.
Hi.
Yes.
Hello. Hi. No, meanwhile, during the discussion that we had online, we talked about the details. So I think this is something that can be clarified technically online. It's more on the technical flavor of fire. So fire has different flavors. One of them is messaging. And for, let's say, implementers like me, when we say fire message, it indicates one technical option, but I think that is not the option here. So I think we can take that clarification offline. I just wanted to see if I was misinterpreting, which I think I am, or if it was a strong technical guidance, which I don't think there's the intention to do that at this moment. Thank you.
So thank you. All right. Then I see another question which might be of general interest, just searching it. It's about the medicinal product legal status of supply or status of legal supply. We know prescription and non-prescription, but there are thinner granularities for this. How do you envisage this? Say, for instance, it is for prescription under certain circumstances or certain dosage, etc. Is this?
I suppose I can take that on behalf of RMS. So we are, we have a very generic list, and we are working first with the colleagues from the vet domain who have an earlier deadline, let's say, to align the terms that are needed to be included in that list to expand the granularity of the legal status of supply. But the underlying assumption is that they will still be standardized, more granular terms, but still standardized and not reflecting every legal basis that exists in all the countries. Because at this stage, we're still not advancing to a prescription scenario, to local use cases that we need all that detail in a central database to support those use cases. So still at a fairly high level, but we are having those discussions with regulators. And once we have a consensus among regulators, then of course we will consult our stakeholders, and we will bring those discussions to the industry and to the sport task force for further input.
Thank you, Isabel. I think this is an interesting space. It happens that I have learned recently from the EDQM that they are maintaining a database with legal status of supply. That database is named MailClass, and it looks like it's not so much known. You see, I'm very young. I never heard about until 2 weeks ago or so. Maybe you neither. And I think this is an interesting thing because it is maintained for a general purpose. So I just mentioned that now, but to let you know, all the audience, the next committee of expertise will also include some insight in this mail class to see if that meets interests and needs on the market. So I think the question was raised a bit in that context.
Christian, yeah, I would like to add also from an industry perspective that a lot of the RMS lists that are mentioned in the EU implementation guide are still not completely defined, and that we are expecting the newly formed focus group on data to do a lot of work to create these lists, to populate them with the applicable values, so that if you're starting now as a company to try to do your mapping of your enterprise terminology to RMS terminology, you might actually not be able to do so. So you might have to postpone some of these activities because those lists aren't completely defined. So our assumption on the very specific case of legal status of supply was that, okay, we have sort of a yes/no value there right now, but there are more values in between that are expected to be added as this work is progressing. So we definitely expect there to be more values. There is a reason, otherwise ISO would have called this a Boolean and not a value that can take multiple values.
Thank you, Patrick. I think, Veronica, you want to answer the question about ECTD as well, right?
No, but what was the question? Sorry.
Oh, it's because my screen said that you would like to answer that question, but it may be outdated because Isabel did. I know that Malin has a question to the group. Malin?
Yes, thank you, Christian. I think this work is really wonderful. It really shows that we can now start to actually work on the implementation for real for IDMP standard, which is like close to my heart, working with global pharmacovigilance. So I'm very curious to see how would you think that this work could actually benefit other regions and other countries? And do you have any collaborations ongoing or that you would like to start to kind of spread these fantastic work?
So there is the regulators forum where there's lots of topics around IDMP. My understanding is that each region is still, they're following the IDMP concepts, but they're still at different pace and at different, looking at different benefits from this implementation. And we have on one hand FDA, who's implemented SPL for many years, but they're now looking into adopting FHIR and seeing what is possible on this sphere, but they're still pretty much SPL based. We have other regions who are now starting, but they're still at conceptual level. They've had conversations bilateral with us of how we've implemented, what's the challenges. And a case that I can recall is Brazil. We have frequent interactions and we've exchanged a few experiences, difficulties with them towards our implementation. And the point that I always make across is not just so much the message, is really these building blocks that are taking us quite a long time to achieve. We're still aligning referentials, we're still aligning organizations to a degree, we're still aligning the substances. And unless those things are working, it's very hard to force everybody to adopt the standard because the data will not be interoperable either. You can't compare the things. So, and that's probably the message I try to bring across. It's not just about products. You can't go into products unless you've done a few steps to get there. But the forum that we normally engage is the regulators forum and a few occasional bilaterals with a few agencies that contact us or that we work closely with.
Thank you, Isabel, for this answer. But I trust you have also in mind that the place to give the feedback if change is needed is ISO, so that we can revise the standards appropriately. And in this revision process, we embark all the regions and not only Europe. I suppose you know them.
We have a contact point very dedicated in ISO, Panagiotis, I'm sure you're familiar with, for the things that really we believe that there's an aspect of whether we believe that it makes sense worldwide or it's still region specific, because we have implemented things which are region specific, probably not of interest of ISO. But if it affects a relationship, it affects a definition, for sure those we will put forward at the convenient opportunity.
Thank you. There was a question somewhere asking if you plan to have a fire implementation guide, something very technical. I see the answer. Everybody has seen the answer. No.
We have the API technical specifications, and we were told by our technical colleagues that is sufficient. Then, because we're implementing FIRE and HL7 standards, there's the practical ways of doing these things, and there's events, there's connectathons, there's many different ways for people to engage and exchange. Also, in the area of the project, we are planning to have POCs, to have user acceptance tests, to make something more practical, but I'm not really, from the top of my head, I'm not aware of any artifact, any document that we are planning to produce. But if you have specific need and you can articulate it to us, I can take it to our technical colleagues, as I'm not the best qualified person to address that.
Thank you. It was a question, and yes, I think everybody has a role in that. Marcos, you want to say something?
No, I agree with Isabel. So we have already discussed this with our IT colleagues, and in principle, everything that is needed is there. But as Isabel said, we will also have this proof of concept with the FIRE. We are working with industry, with NCAs, with different associations. So if there is any need, there's ways to bring these questions to us, so we can forward these questions to our colleagues.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, it was also my expectation that as a result of these proof of concepts that we will have perhaps some of the concrete FIRE examples documented inside one of the next point releases of the implementation guides. Of course, if it's realistic to do so, but I think many colleagues in the industry and also software vendors especially are really craving to get some concrete examples. And personally, I'm in agreement with Isabel that if you know where to look for the FIRE standard, which is very clearly articulated in the IG, and if you read Chapter 6, the technical specification and the SPORE API, you have everything you need to form very valid, correct FIRE messages that will interact with PMS. But I think it's maybe more to reassure, to bring comfort to the users that this would be really helpful.
So indeed, the examples we are planning to do, so that's on our to-do list, but it's kind of an extension of what we already have in our current artifacts. I was a bit surprised because I didn't know we had to produce yet new documents on top. So we have, as you say, Chapter 6, which is the technical specification. There's lots of information in HL7. And in addition, we're expanding Chapter 8 with the examples, with concrete FIRE examples. And that is planned work. I believe Veronica can confirm that.
Thank you. Well, there is a question which is very accurate. I suppose many on the meeting know that ISO had recently a ballot about the development of an IDMP logical model. And that has provoked a lot of discussions, and it is actually very good. It is somehow a living democracy in that sense. And we also published a week ago, so press release saying that the logical model which ISO is going to start to work on is not going to be disruptive. It's not the intention at all, but it should be something enabling a wider homogeneous implementation of IDMP. Now the question is, my question is actually, apparently Emma, you have a logical data model which has been circulated to the industry in the past. So I can read in the chat box, so in the Q&A. I cannot remember that, certainly I did not notice it. Is it your intention to reshare that with the ISO experts?
We can surely consider that. We've had it's a PMS logical data model that was defined a long time ago. It has elements which are not ISO elements on purpose, because a typical example is it has the veterinary data fields, and ISO IDMP is not meant to support the veterinary domain. So, and it also has, even on the human side, certain extensions that we deliberately included because they're needed for EU purposes, not necessarily for global purposes as such. But what I would need to do is I would have to consult my colleagues to make sure that it's still an updated version, because I don't know if we've maintained it with the current discussions and consultations. And I would rather do a little sanity check before circulating it to make sure that there's no inconsistencies in that. But surely we can revisit and we can share the logical data model that we have.
Thank you. Good. I don't see so many questions, but a statement which I just read from the screen here. Maybe I misunderstood the answer, but examples are examples and useful, but cannot be used really as examples to automatically validate the FIRE instances. This is what FIRE profile and implementation guide allow to do. So that was just a statement from one of the participants. Okay, it looks like we are at the end of this 90 minutes sharing of information. I would like to conclude to all the participants first. We have this unique chance that our colleagues at EMA are open to communicate. And this is very much appreciated. It has not always been like this in my life. You know, 40 years ago, speaking to somebody from the authority was a terrible story. Nowadays, we are in this sharing attitude. And I would like to say a big thank you from the user community to your openness and willingness to share your experience, your thoughts, and your visions program. It is also not, it was not always like this, that we have panelists such as one from the industry or one from WHO Competence Center ready to share also and expose themselves to questions and answers. And this is very much appreciated. On the UNICOM point of view, it is important that we can participate to this exchange of information between the standard developers, work package 1, where you find these, and the standard implementers. And of course, one of the stakeholders in this space is the European Medicine Agency, doubtless. So in that sense, it is an enrichment for us, the users. I hope it is also a bit an enrichment for you as EMA to see what people think at, what are the questions or observations. That would be the purpose for this community of expertise. Community means we are together. I'm coming to the end of this session. I would like to thank everybody for having joined. Of course, the speaker and panelists at the front. There is still some time to answer the questionnaire, which I opened shortly ago. With that, I wish you a good rest of the day. I look forward to meet you at the very next opportunity. Take care and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.